Well, insurance is going to be chaotic and complex because we are in a healthcare industry which is chaotic and complex.
Welcome to the Business of Healthcare, a twice-monthly podcast from the Center for Healthcare Leadership and Management. The center is based at the Naveen Jindal School of Management at the University of Texas at Dallas. The show, like the center, brings together business leaders and other forward thinkers to discuss how best to meet the challenges of a rapidly changing, increasingly complex healthcare industry. I'm your host, Dr. Britt Berrett.
We're delighted to meet with Bob Kaiser. Bob Kaiser is a very accomplished executive in the healthcare space, but recently joined the University of Texas at Dallas and the Jindal School of Management as faculty and director. We'll get more into that in a moment, but Bob is an accomplished executive. And Bob, thank you for joining us on this podcast.
Delighted to be here. Really delighted to be part of the university and what we're doing here at the School of Management.
Having said that, give us a little bit of your background. I think those that are listening will be fascinated with the kind of the course that you've traveled for your career.
Well, I think it all really starts with lifelong learning. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I am not a millennial. All right. And I think you can figure that out when you see my picture. Okay. But I've been actively involved in learning my entire life. And ultimately, I ended up here at the university with a PhD in learning technology. So how did that happen? So along the way, I started off with an engineering program at Purdue and have an engineering degree. Went to work with a number of small startups that turned into be public companies. So being an entrepreneur in the Silicon Valley space, doing some learning technology in the Dallas space, but ultimately ended up in the healthcare area. So after the terrible .com bomb of the early 2000s, I decided to get into something that doesn't plug in the wall, not high tech, and that was healthcare. So I've been involved a lot with healthcare, and particularly in the insurance area, specifically health savings accounts. And I was fortunate to join Bank of America to head up a new line of business there that was strictly focused on health savings accounts. So that's kind of the quick short story of how I ended up here. So
yeah, the insurance role that is played in the United States healthcare delivery system is fascinating. It's overwhelming, that insurance space as we talk about the delivery of healthcare. Now, health spending accounts, that was a big issue. Now, Bank of America, who would have thunk, right?
Yeah.
Tell us how that occurred.
Well, obviously, when you stop and look at, a program that's sponsored by the government, by the Treasury Department, and they let you know that you can put aside tax-free money to be used for healthcare, that looks attractive. And not only can you put aside money, but you can also have that money be invested. And so once again, if you're a financial institution, you look at that as an opportunity to help people with their long-term financial plans, including retirement and current activities. So the bank looked at that and said, look, what do we have here at Bank of America? We have consumer education, very large consumer bank. We have web services. In other words, we can handle the internet and things of that way to communicate with people. We also have card technology, so smart card technology, so you can do transactions and things of that nature. So it made good sense for that to be part of the bank. It initially started off in the Treasury area, but ultimately moved into the financial wellness program from Bank of America Merrill Lynch. So it became right in line with your 401k, your defined benefit plan, your equity program, and your health benefit solutions. So all that kind of integrated together. And it was primarily directed towards plan sponsors, the employers that provide insurance to people.
We thought the health spending accounts would just absolutely rock the world. It made so much intuitive sense that you could set aside a portion of your income, apply it into an insurance product. Anything that wasn't used was in an investment vehicle. Tell me how that Bank of America looked at that and how they look at it now. Is that something we'll see pop up again, expand, contract?
Well, I think it's probably important to look at the growth that's taken place in that particular area. So it has grown. It was initiated in 2003. It was part of some legislation that was actually tied to Medicare with Part D prescription coverage. And so it was introduced in 2003. It has grown 20% a year every year since that time. So the growth in terms of users is significant. The growth in terms of assets under management, the number of dollars being saved and invested, has grown significantly as well. So collectively, $50 billion of money are in the HSA accounts today. That's a lot of money.
Wow.
Okay? So education's the key thing. It takes 5 years for plan sponsors to understand what this new program is. And then it takes another 5 years for employees that work for these companies that have plan sponsors. Now, you don't have to get it through your employer. The HSA is unique. It's not like the flexible spending account where it's plan sponsored.
Right.
The HSA, any individual can have it. The requirements for it are pretty minimal. You have to have a heartbeat. Okay. You have to be alive. You can't be on Medicare. If you're on Medicare, then you're not eligible for it. And you have to have an insurance program that's called a high deductible plan. I'd like to call it a low premium plan as opposed to high deductible. But essentially, that became a very attractive opportunity for people to set aside not a little bit of money, but a significant amount of money. On your 401k, you can set aside, up to $20,000 or so. On the health savings account, you can go up to about $8,000 or so. Those are rough numbers, but it's a significant component of your savings.
Now, you were with Bank of America for, 10 years?
12 years, yeah.
12 years.
Yeah.
And then we caught your attention.
Yes. So I believe in having a 5-year plan. I think everybody should have a 5-year plan. And I mentioned that I had an engineering degree from Purdue. That was in 1975. So you can do the math and calculate how old I am. And working at an institution like Bank of America, there's opportunity for conflict and different areas to be concerned with in terms of resolving issues. So I thought it'd be prudent to get a master's degree in conflict management and dispute resolution.
Genius.
Yes.
Yeah.
And why? Because I needed it. I needed it to survive in large organizations. And that's not taking anything away from any employer. In life in general, you need to have a better way of negotiating and working through conflicts and having difficult conversations. So I went to SMU here in town, and I spent 1,680 hours in the classroom learning about conflict management, dispute resolution. So part of my 5-year plan was at some point in time, I want to shift out of what I call the big employer environment and go into the education space. So with that thought in mind, I dedicated myself to get a PhD from the University of North Texas, and that is in learning technology. So part of the plan, I've been actively involved in the community here in Richardson. I lived in Richardson for many, many years. I was the former chairman of the Chamber of Commerce. I've been involved with the university here on their School of Management board for many years as well. And I am just so impressed with what goes on here. The growth, the investment, the technology, the people, the affiliation. It's incredible. And so I wanted to become part of this organization. And so fortunately, there's a huge area of growth in healthcare leadership and management. And this is the perfect shoe that fits Cinderella's foot for me. So it's ideal. I'm very fortunate to be able to walk into the organization today and get involved right away. The team here that's supporting us has done a great job. So I feel very comfortable here in this new role and look forward to making some significant contributions here in terms of this operation.
Well, there's no question that you'll add a tremendous amount of educational enlightenment for those that attend. I'm just really excited to have you on the faculty, and we'll talk about your program in a moment. But let's back up just a little bit. The insurance industry is complex. It's, some would say, chaotic. What's your take on healthcare insurance in general? Where do you think we're going with this?
Well, insurance is going to be chaotic and complex because we are in a healthcare industry which is chaotic and complex. So you wouldn't expect anything different from the insurance perspective on it. So we all know that this industry in America is a $3.2 trillion spend. And first off, try to make those numbers a little bit realistic to the individual. All right. So 3.2 trillion, that's 3,200 billion. Okay. 3.2 trillion is 3,200 billion. And people say, well, what's a billion? So I challenge anybody, if you like to count $1 billion 1 second at a time, okay, guess what? It'll take you 31 years to count $1 billion. Okay. That's just to count a billion. So if you're going to count 3,200 of those billions, it's beyond the generational lifespan of history almost. Okay. So it's a big situation. And when we stop at that money, look at that money and how it's being spent, that I think the number is 5% of the people represent 50% of that spend.
I think that's an important point to make. When we start looking at healthcare, it hits every part of the community, right? From emergency room services to pharmaceutical interventions to delivering babies to fixing knees. Totally get that. But there's a group that has a large portion of that healthcare spend. As you mentioned, 5% of the population spend 50% of all healthcare dollars. So to that end, insurance plays a key and critical role. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So let's look at the employer space first off. The employers, 155 million people get their insurance today through their employer. And if you have insurance through your employer, you have a lot of different options you can select from a high deductible plan to what's called a PPO plan. Different amounts of payments are made. And understanding how insurance works takes a little bit of time and effort to figure that out. Most people don't look at it until they need it. They don't plan accordingly.
Right.
But if you look at the employer space, 155 million, that's about 49% of the population. They get their insurance from their employer.
Why is that? I mean, my insurance is not, my car insurance isn't paid by my employer. I don't have house insurance that's paid for by my employer. Why does the employer pick up such a heavy burden of responsibility? What's the scoop?
Well, there's a history on that as well. Okay. And everything has a start. So when did accident insurance actually first start in the United States? I think it was in the year 1850. And it was for steamboats and railroads. Someone came up with the idea that if there's an accident, we'll insure you for it. Okay.
Got it.
So moving to the medical insurance world. Okay. Actually, if you go back to the early 1929, 30 time frame, hospitals, when you went to a hospital, you paid for the services. It was called fee for service. So if you had to go to the hospital and you got a bill, you would pay the bill. Well, in Dallas, Texas here, actually, a group of teachers decided to come up with a hospital plan. And this hospital plan said, we'll all contribute money. How about $5 a month? Contribute money into this program so that when we go to the hospital, we can basically have those expenses offset. We don't have to pay the fee for service by ourselves. And that was actually the origination of Blue Cross. And Blue Cross was for hospitals. And it started here. And that concept and idea spread and became pretty popular. And a couple years later, Blue Shield came into the scene, which was for your doctors, not the hospital bills, but for your doctor bills. And so from the 40s, about 10% of the people had insurance. And in the 50s, like 1955, about 70% of the people had insurance.
Through their employer.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, there's a history there. So what really kicked into place to make this thing employer-based? So, we have a history of war. We had the Great War. Then we had World War II. Mm-hmm. And in World War II, there were price constraints. People were rationing things like sugar and gas and everything else, rubber. Everything was under control. And wages went under control as well. We wanted people to stay in their jobs, to work the war effort, not to job hop back and forth to different places. So we were not going to allow people who needed to hire people to bring them in at a higher wage. So there were price controls and wage controls put in place. To offset that, creativity kicked in, and they said, we can offer you benefits. We'll give you health insurance benefits.
So they adhered to the capped salary rates or hourly rates, but they throw these little bennies in there, to lure people into in their area. Yep. Interesting. Okay.
So that's where the benefit business really started to take off. Okay. And guess what? It became a competitive advantage. You come work for me and I will give you this. And someone else would say, and I will give you this. I'll give you not only health insurance, but I'll also give you pet insurance. I will give you longevity insurance.
Eye insurance, dental insurance. The list goes on and on, right?
Yes. Okay. So that became a very competitive issue. And today it still is. There's still a war on talent. And people will go to work somewhere. People will go work at Starbucks to get healthcare benefits.
Interesting.
So that's certainly a history of things. But look back on it and look forward on it. Look at the changes that are taking place. So there's this new economy called the gig economy. And, the gig is, hey, what's your gig? I play in the band. Not anymore. I'm a freelance writer. I'm a freelance analyst. I want to, work by myself. I don't want to work for the organization. And there's a growing trend right now to be part of the gig economy. And the question happens there. If this continues to grow, where is the insurance going to come from? You don't have an employer. So innovation and change will have to take place in the insurance industry moving forward. And it's not crystal clear, Britt, exactly what's going to happen in those specific scenarios.
What do you think? What's your guess?
Well,
I have some strong feelings about this because it's a dilemma that we have in that we an employer assumes responsibility to orchestrate, select, manage the healthcare insurance for their employees. They don't do that, as I mentioned, for my car insurance or my house insurance, but they do it for my health insurance. I'm of the opinion it's unsustainable, but you've been in the industry. What do you think? Is it here to stay?
Yeah, I like to quote one of my colleagues. The short answer is, the long answer is, I don't know. But to kind of give you a trend and direction. So we've all seen the Shark Tank show.
Yeah.
And the most famous words by any of the judges on Shark Tank is, I'm out. I'm out. Well, guess what? A lot of the employers are starting to take on the I'm out. I'm out of this business. I am no longer going to provide this for you. I'm going to create a defined benefit program for you, and I will give you the money, and you go shop for it. You make the choices on what insurance you need. So if I give you $15,000, I'm off. I don't have to deal with all these issues associated with it. And it's kind of a consumerism movement. All right. And, you talk about consumerism because you made a really good point, Britt, in that, look, when you get a crack in your windshield, do you call the insurance company? Some people do. When you need new windshield wipers, do you call the insurance company? No, you go down to the auto parts and get some new windshield wipers. Okay. And the same with healthcare. When you catch a cold, do you call the insurance company and say, oh my gosh, I caught a cold. You got to pay for this. You know, the trend now has become a consumer. For you to be responsible, you take the money, you make the decisions, just like you'd shop for a new computer or a car or a TV or any other commodity. You make the decisions on what you want to buy and how you want to pay for it. And that whole concept there fits nicely with this defined benefit approach. And you're starting to see some of the larger companies now evaluating and looking at this as a viable option. Because for example, large company where I used to work probably spent around $3 billion on insurance costs. They're self-insured, so that meant that they were paying for that insurance, the company was. They might have paid $80 or $100 million to someone to administer the insurance program, but still nearly $3 billion of cost. So how do you educate people to make good decisions, to take ownership in their health, and to be responsible for a portion of their health care?
This episode is brought to you by the Center for Healthcare Leadership and Management, the definitive resource for healthcare management education in North Texas. The center is based in the Naveen Jindal School of Management at the University of Texas at Dallas. It plays a unique role in training the next generation of healthcare leaders to meet local, regional, and national demands. The Jindal School uses its strengths in accounting, administration, finance, marketing, and information systems to educate highly qualified personnel for healthcare administration and executive leadership positions. The center is home to 7 healthcare leadership and management programs, including undergraduate and graduate programs, as well as executive programs for physicians and working professionals. For more information, visit us online at jindal.utdallas.edu/healthcare.
See, I think it's fascinating. I look at this issue of defined contribution and defined benefit. And I always wondered what the difference was. So for laymen, a defined contribution is I'm going to give you X number of dollars towards this benefit, specific amount, $15,000. That's a defined contribution. Defined benefit is, hey, I'm going to give you health insurance. The price can go through the roof, but I said I'd give you health insurance. We have, with our retirees and some of the, for example, the automotive industry, they've been guaranteed defined benefit as opposed to defined contribution. Now that we get our arms around that, we can see that the average employer contributes about $15,000 per year per employee. What would happen if they went to the employees and say, hey, here's $15,000. You go out on the market, go on healthcare.com or one of the, some website, select the kind of healthcare benefits that you want, and we'll just give you that $50,000. You can decide.
Yeah.
I just see that as on the horizon, and with technology and, as you mentioned, the gig industry, the gig economy, a really a strong possibility. Am I on track, or am I a little too?
I think there's trends that took place. So if you back up on retirement programs, defined benefit programs meant a pension plan.
Right.
And almost everybody offered a pension plan. Even where I used to work, they had a pension plan until about 5 years ago. And they said, we're out. Okay. And what does that mean? That means that instead of putting money into a pension plan and making those decisions for you and being in charge of that and guaranteeing you a retirement, you now are going to make those decisions. So defined benefit plan became a 401k or a defined contribution plan. So you selected to put your money into it. They would match it potentially.
Right.
And then you made the choices of how you wanted that money invested. So you're responsible for it. So on the insurance thing, it's really dangerous to give someone who doesn't know how to drive the keys to the car, especially, if you're used to driving in America and now you're going to be driving in the UK. You have different rules and different directions. And education is going to be a key component of defined contribution for healthcare, because if you don't know what a premium is, if you think premium is a quality of beer, you're in trouble. So you need to be educated. And quite honestly, there's a lot of education that's taken place in the world of finance. So there's measurements of financial literacy that's taken place. And there's some surveys that go out every year that measure 3 different components of people's financial literacy. They ask them about investments. What's more complicated, a mutual fund or a direct stock, which has more risk? Sounds like a pretty easy answer. What about interest? If you get paid 2% interest, do you have more money or less money? These are simple questions. Okay. What about inflation? If you have 2% inflation, what does that do to your take-home pay? And the majority of the people flunk this test. Okay. And I think in similar fashion, people would flunk the insurance test too.
I agree.
So we really need to focus on education if change is going to happen. And like I said earlier, the long answer is, I don't know. Don't know where it's going.
No, serious. You've got to know. But we demand that you know. We talked about the insurance industry. I'm of the opinion that we're going to need some disruptive technology, that there's got to be some disruption that's significant in nature. We can't retain this double-digit year-over-year growth in the healthcare expense. And I recall the election. I thought Hillary Clinton would get into the White House, and I thought that this would be expansion of the Affordable Health Care Act, and that I kind of, positioned my lectures and my thoughts, and I got to tell you, I had no idea. Now I'm not quite sure where we're going with it. I think there's been some very positive changes. There are elements of the Affordable Health Care Act that they've retained that I think are exceptional. Some other elements I believe were self-destructive, and I think we backed away from them. So I'm delighted with that. But I'm not quite sure where we're going with it. What's your take? And you can't say I don't know. That's no fair.
Well, adding to the Affordable Care Act, people like to refer to it as Obamacare, give it a kind of a different twist on it.
Sure.
But take the politics out of it. There are some basic fundamental attributes that are related to people on the people side. The Affordable Care Act dealt with a lot of issues, not just the personal lives of people, but it dealt a lot with insurance regulations and rules, et cetera. Very complex piece of legislation. So if you wanted to find something to criticize, you don't have to look deep to find different areas. But some of the things that it tried to do was to try to establish some basic elements of insurance that would be included in all insurance programs. So for example, you don't want to have a situation where you're denied coverage. Okay.
Right.
That just doesn't make sense. And people have been confined to employment at a particular employer because they'll lose their insurance. They won't be able to get insurance back. Some of the things that were popular in it as well was to provide coverage for your children up to the age of 26. So, there's a lot of different things that people might say are, advantageous to the program, but going forward, there's a lot of issues that have to be dealt with. And today, when you buy insurance, state regulations confine a lot of the direction of where insurance goes. If some of those things were changed, where you had a larger population, you're not restricted by states where insurance is covered, that could very well make the insurance more affordable. There's different ideas in terms of having health savings accounts being opportunistic for everybody. You don't have to have a high deductible plan, but everybody could contribute tax-free money into an account so they could use it later for their healthcare expenses. I mentioned earlier, we're going to be living a lot longer. Okay. It was about a half hour before Y2K, the year 2000. Sarah Nouse died. She was 118 years old. She had 6 generations at her bedside. Okay. She was the exception. She was a Six Sigma longevity person. Today, it's claimed a baby born today would live or could live to 150 years old.
Wow.
That would be the new Sarah Nouse, 150 years old. Now, what does that do to your model for insurance or health? And it really comes down to people have to get educated about their health. And we all know that if you get the right 3 ingredients, if you move and you eat and you sleep right, your health is going to be better if you don't. Okay. And we're always looking for solutions that might remedy that a lot quicker and a lot easier. You look at the expansion of nutrition and food. That's probably one of the single most important elements of health. It's not discussed or educated nearly enough.
Right.
There's 20,000 new KFCs or other products out there in the market that people have to choose from. And if the same level of effort for advertising was going into a healthy lifestyle, which it doesn't, and you're not going to change that overnight, but education is going to be a key component of reforming how we look at health, how we pay for health, how we get involved with health. There may be a single payer system at some point in time in the future.
Wow.
Yeah.
You think?
Could very well be. So
I'm going to hold you to that. I think that will occur when I turn 148, and then I'll just clump right over. That'll be the.
I don't know who the payer is going to be. It might be Amazon.
Yeah, it could be Amazon. Bob, couldn't be more delighted and grateful for your participation in this podcast. I'm Dr. Britt Berrett at the Jindal School of Management, where we are in the business of healthcare.
Thanks for joining us here on the Business of Healthcare podcast. Join us online at businessofhealthcarepodcast.com to find episodes, notes, links, and more. And be sure to subscribe to the Business of Healthcare podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcasting app. To learn more about the Center for Healthcare Leadership and Management, go to jindal.utdallas.edu and then search under the Centers and Institutes tab on the navigation menu. I'm Dr. Britt Berrett, Director of the Center for Healthcare Leadership and Management, where we're leading change by changing how we lead.